And on Thursday night, it's going to be a place of murder. A murder that doesn't have to happen, but one that has happened now over and over and over again under a supposed pro-life governor that could stop any of these murders with a phone call.
There is no redemption with the death penalty. There is no hope with the death penalty. We pray that Governor Bill Lee will live up to what he writes on Twitter.
What do we want? Justice! When do we want it? Now!
Christians, we are the problem. The death penalty would not stand a chance in America if it weren't for the support of Christians. 95% of executions are happening in the Bible Belt. So we are raising up our voices, right? To stand up for mercy, to stand up for life.
We won't be silent anymore. Everybody say somebody's hurting our children and it's gone on far too long. Good morning, good evening, what am I saying? Good evening, my name is Abe Bonowitz. I'm the Executive Director of Death Penalty Action, coming to you from the Wild Goose Festival in North Carolina. So it's been a couple of days of talking to people about the Anthony Sanchez case and all the other things. We're here in partnership with our friends in North Carolinians for alternatives to the death penalty, and South Carolinians for alternatives to the death penalty, and Georgians, and a lot of people here from Ohio and other places, talking about the death penalty, talking about people putting their Christian faith into action and their other faith into action and all that. So we're grateful that you're here. And we've got an outstanding panel tonight. We're going to have a little conversation about this film. But really, there's not much more that needs to be said about it than what you're going to see in the film. And we promised our start time at 9 o'clock, and that's where we're at. So we're going to go ahead and roll the film. It is possible. Obviously, we put it up on the webpage so you can see it on all of our social media, but it's possible to watch it there. But we're going to watch it together now. It's about 23 minutes, and then we're going to have a little conversation about it. And we hope that you find this to be worth your time tonight. Everybody can turn off your cameras and your mics, and Allie, roll it.
On December the 20th, 1996, Juli Buskin was abducted from her apartment complex, driven out to Lake Stanley Draper, and executed, murdered on the shore. For years, authorities had very little evidence and no suspects to go on. They found a trace amount of DNA on a leotard that was found close to the body of Juli Buskin. Using that trace amount, they claim to 6 or 7 years later get a random match on Anthony Sanchez. Anthony Sanchez was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death based on that trace amount of DNA.
It seems like the prosecutors, they just made up a story. I don't know where they got it from. They wouldn't let none of his family come in the trial. He had to sit there by himself.
What was Anthony like growing up?
He was a happy kid. He had a smile on his face all the time. I mean, he had the biggest grin. If you look at any of his pictures, he's got this big grin. And he was real loving. He's real soft-hearted. From a baby on, he was a good kid.
When he got a death sentence, what was your reaction? What was that like?
It was the worst day of my life, you know, and there's nothing you can do. As a mother, you want to help him and save him, and it was bad. It was just heartbreaking. He had an attorney, a real hateful attorney. I tried to tell him, you know, you need to defend him, and he said, well, we're not trying to get him out right now. We're just trying to keep him off death row. Well, why would you not bring up the evidence that's going to prove his innocence instead of just trying to get him off death row?
So you feel like in the midst of the entire trial and the entire process, there was nobody defending Anthony?
Nobody.
When I met Anthony Sanchez last fall, I sat down with him and he began to talk to me about innocence, and I didn't really know what to think because I hear about innocence from these guys a lot.
You know, at death penalty action, we take every case in order. I mean, we address every single execution, whether they're guilty or innocent. So, you know, this one sort of came onto our radar as one of the 25 in Oklahoma. But when Jeff came and said, you know, this guy says he's innocent, I think he's full of it, I said, great, you know, we'll just do what we usually do.
But, you know, as I kind of pushed more and more into this case, again, it started becoming stranger and stranger as to how this was pinpointed to be Anthony.
But then Jeff came back and said, I think he's innocent, and we need money for testing and an investigator and all this. I didn't know what that was going to take, but I sent a text to one of my best and longest donors, and you know, within half an hour she wrote back and said yes. And that's what allowed us to get to the point that we're at today, where there's an independent investigator who's putting his jobs with the state on the line to come out and counter the narrative of the state.
My name is David Ballard. I'm a CLEAT licensed private investigator. I am also an expert witness and an instructor on courses approved for investigators and law enforcement. For the last 11 years, I've worked as a private investigator on crime scenes and on evidence and forensics, ballistics. Pretty much my expertise was anything violent crime. Back in December of 22, I was contacted by one of the attorneys for Anthony Sanchez. Needed someone who was familiar with DNA and crime scenes, follow up on some evidence and try to reach out and find other DNA evidence and have it tested. Well, initially, when I got some of the documentation or some interviews and the sketches, the first impression was the sketch, that nothing about the sketch appeared to match Anthony. Then went through some of the witness statements. It very quickly had to move to trying to locate an item with DNA for his dad, Glenn Sanchez. So involved reaching out to Charlotte, his ex, and start from there. But when I met with her, she was very open to talk to me and was very, forthcoming with information. And then I told her that I had been informed that at some point she may have heard a confession or a statement, and it turned out to be 3 different incidents where Glenn Sanchez had confessed he had killed Juli Buskin, that he should have done a better job getting rid of her, and that Anthony was taking it like a man.
It was probably about 2014. He said, at least Anthony's taking it for me. He said, I'm the one that did it. He said that, she had a tight ass. And he kept on bragging about it because he said no one will ever know. It seemed like every few months he'd talk about it. And I'd ask him, why are you letting Anthony suffer for it? And he said, well, because he can handle it. And he said, Anthony doesn't know. Whenever I die, no one will know the truth about what happened to Juli.
Did Glenn ever give any sort of details or anything like that when he was making these types of comments?
Yeah, he would turn around saying that he tied her up, he hog-tied her, and he said he raped her.
But as I was interviewing Charlotte, she was the first one to tell me that one of the reasons Anthony didn't finish school was because Glenn would beat on him so bad. Sometimes he was just too beat up to go to school, that he put hands on her. He would, literally just go off, black out, and become very violent. So now you've got he's got a propensity towards a potential for violence towards women and other people, but sometimes, you like, well, that's in her family, not that it makes it better, but where do you go from there? It was when she started talking about his sexual behavior too that really stood out. Aggressive when told no, had issues with performance and blamed it on women. A lot of times making them do things face down, didn't want them looking at him, including trying to force women to have sex with animals, sodomizing them with handles to hammers, waking up and being bound, and him assaulting them.
The abuse grew with time. It was sexual abuse. He figured if a baby can come out of it, a fist can go in it.
Mm.
And if I screamed, he would go further.
Mm.
And he'd go in my butt too.
Mm.
And, I was afraid to say something because he'd always say, if you say anything, if I don't do it, somebody else will, I'll kill you. I'd come out of the room crying or something, and, or else I'll flip out on my kids over him. Why don't you get rid of him? Well, I was afraid to. I got where I was scared myself that, are you going to harm my kids? Or are you going to try to harm me?
I mean, you take that piece and then you add in the fact of, according to Charlotte and then Glenn's own words to the detectives, he went by Draper all the time. Matter of fact, in one of the interviews when they're asking about Anthony, they're trying to establish if Anthony was familiar with Lake Draper. They asked Glenn, have you ever taken Anthony fishing there? And he said, yes, I'm like when he was a kid. They said, where'd you like to go? And he tells them, oh, I was over there by the bridge, and he was referring to the dam. He talks about the dirt road, the gravel, and off the beaten path. And the detective put in his report that he thought that was interesting because that is right next to where they found Juli Buskin's body. I believe Anthony's first attorneys even thought it might be Glenn because Anthony got upset about that, because at that point no one had any inclination that way. But we're not the only ones. The detective also was looking pretty hard at Glenn, but couldn't get there at that time.
They stuck with Anthony Sanchez because he's a poor kid. They already had this whole narrative built up. They already were able to take the DNA and manipulate it, make it fit. And they didn't take the time to investigate Glenn Sanchez.
There's a lot that goes into any kind of forensic evidence. You have to be very careful with how you move it, package it. They started with a cowboy hat, but they got a mixed DNA sample, which also aided to what my position was on the DNA, is you cannot get an exact 100% single profile when you have mixed DNA, because you can't always separate the two. And you can even get DNA that masks over another to where you can't see it. They came back with a cowboy hat in February stating that it was mixed, but they could move to the toothbrush. And in March, they were able to do the toothbrush and pull a single profile. So the profile we got was a male profile. But again, this is from his hygiene kit, but we have to ask the question, making sure that it's for sure Glenn's DNA profile, but based off what we've seen. The next thing was comparing it to what we had already supplied of a DNA chart that was given to me from Anthony's legal team. And matter of fact, when I first saw that document, I think we had a meeting right after, and I had an issue as soon as I saw the first table that had all the DNA profiles. And that was because Juli Buskin had matching DNA numbers in her loci that matched Anthony. And not just Anthony, but a prior person who'd been looked at as a suspect in 3 separate loci, complete matches, which that should not happen unless you're a relative. In this case, the only matching numbers came from the leotard. That was interesting because that in the statements of the evidence that was found is that there was no items that did not contain mixed DNA. Matter of fact, the leotard contained what seemed like a smear of potentially fecal matter and what they believed to be spermatozoa. So that was odd to me that they, one, got 100% match on any item, especially since some of the other items, underwear, things like that, did not have those kind of matches. And you would assume the underwear she was wearing was going to have a lot more of a match to it than anything else.
It's interesting. You keep on hearing the state say well, you've got to trust the DNA. The DNA is going to show us the truth. And it sounds like from where you sit, your persuasion, the DNA is showing us the truth, and that is that Anthony is innocent.
Yes, I mean, well, one, the DNA, the sheets that we have were someone generated. They're not like the benchmarks you get, the lab notes, and all the details that would be in there of how they broke it down. And the thing to remember is, I believe 5 different technicians worked this evidence. And from 97, when the first test was done, and they were able to pull 4 loci on a profile, to all the way until 2000 when they do a PCR, and now they get, I believe, 13 loci is what they said. But as they're going, they're swabbing and doing this and testing this evidence. Typically, and I think I've given you this reference that I've heard before, imagine taking a picture and putting it on a copier and keep copying it and keep copying it. You don't get a stronger picture by doing that. And there was a swatch cut out of the leotard that was used for testing, and a swatch, 2 inch by 2 inch square that contains the most evidence. And typically you swab those, you don't actually do it on that item. And that plays an important fact, because at one stage in this case, when DNA was challenged, it was a letter that I'm in receipt of now, the DA's office, saying that items were consumed and were no longer available. And I believe we had a conversation about that, and I said that could be a problem because you should swab every bit of it. And they said swabs were put away in storage. Also, one of the evidence items that they listed that were taken, this is when Melissa Keith comes in, is she said she received one large envelope and literally all the evidence was stuffed into one envelope.
So all the swabs, everything stuffed in one envelope.
One big giant envelope.
What was going on in Oklahoma City at the Oklahoma City lab during that time?
During that time was not a really good time for Oklahoma City Crime Lab. That was during the Joyce Gilchrist days, where it came out that she had altered evidence or falsified reports. And I forget how many, it was a bunch of cases, drug on for a number of years of them figuring out how many cases she actually did it on. That she had either falsified evidence or just straight lied about it on the reports.
So as you go down this DNA trail and you begin to realize, that there are these issues, you've got Melissa Keith at the trial on the stand saying this is a 100% match. How possible is a 100% match under normal circumstances, and then how possible is a 100% match under these circumstances?
So 100% match is, you're going to be, I'll put a swab in your mouth, take it out, and it gets packaged right or directed right there at the lab. Then you're going to get a very clean match. But from a crime scene with mixed DNA, and then 8 years later, after it's been handled how many times? Your chances of success on a 100% match are going to get real slim. I've only received partial, at this point, because of what it related to, it was Melissa Keith's testimony at the trial. And initially she talks about how the match worked and all this, but when she gets pressed on, and I believe it's in the transcript, that's where she states that, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but basically she didn't get a full match, but based off her knowledge and training, she felt like it was good enough or a strong enough match.
Greetings. This is Reverend Dr. Jeff Hood, spiritual advisor for Anthony Sanchez. I'm joined by David Ballard, who is the investigator on the case. In this video, we want to talk about why a shoe print that they cited is erroneous and should have never been included as evidence.
Yeah, as you said, Jeff, there was a shoe print that was found at the scene, and then it was stated that it matched potentially a shoe print of a style and type of shoe that Anthony Sanchez may have owned at one time. However, again, you're talking about a mass-produced shoe, and even if you go with that and say that, yes, Anthony could have owned this type of shoe, the problem is that it was a size 9 shoe, and Anthony Sanchez, even at the time when he was just 9 months past being 18 years old, that didn't match his shoe size at that time anyway. And I believe the reference to a shoe was something from much earlier on in his life which was a very common shoe type. And you also have to go back to, there's been a lot of developments in processes and crime scenes, and a lot of these techniques, they can be supportive, but they're not absolute. The questions I have for this case are, one, the DNA, the lab notes, the collection process, chain of custody. There's a lot of documentation missing. Two would be any kind of photographs or anything of how the packaging of the evidence was. Next would be the likelihood of getting it retested, because that's the best way to answer the question. Retest the evidence, compare it all now and see what we have. The fingerprints. If you didn't get Anthony's, compare them to Glenn's. Compare Glenn's DNA. At least then it'd be ruled out, because what if it isn't Glenn? I mean, there's always that chance. I mean, a fingerprint from Glenn Sanchez on her car would be huge, because there should be no reason whatsoever his fingerprint should be there. What about the pajama bottoms? What about the other underwear that are all in her car and not readily accessible? But all those came back nothing to Anthony, and they said they found all kind of DNA evidence on that stuff. So where are those profiles? Instead of trying to make the evidence match Anthony, let the evidence tell you what it's trying to tell you. One of my requests would be for them to test Glenn Sanchez against CODIS, because one of Glenn's own family members stated that they actually turned him in on another case because they saw a sketch that they thought resembled him. And it was a woman who was assaulted and murdered not far from Norman.
So there is suspicion out there that Glenn Sanchez could have been a serial killer.
It's what, as I understand it. We have evidence right now in the possession of the state that could exonerate Anthony Sanchez. And not just exonerate him, but potentially give us the suspect, the person responsible. And if we have that capability and we have the evidence, why in the world would we not do it?
Do you think there is any way possible that Anthony could be guilty of the murder of Juli Buskin?
No. He was what would you call it, like a sweetheart. He just, a lovable kid.
We want to know the truth. We know that Anthony Sanchez did not do this. The evidence is clear. But even if you still believe that he did do this, shouldn't it be investigated on a much deeper level, where all of these questions that we are bringing up just aren't left out there? You see, if Anthony Sanchez is executed, the truth will be executed. The questions will remain and the truth will be executed. So we are asking you to stand with us to give life to the truth, to give life to a deeper investigation, and to give life to the memory of Juli Buskin.
So I'm Abe Bonowitz with Death Penalty Action, and we operate hand to mouth, but what we have is massive impact. And it's because of people who support the work, who make a donation, go to deathpenaltyaction.org and donate, that we're able to do this work. So I'm asking you today, if you value what we're trying to do, and if you are able to, please chip in, whatever you can. If it's $5 or $5 million, you give it to us, we will use it to create change, and to stop executions. Well, we can take a few minutes to process that. I want to invite everybody on our panel to turn on your cameras. We'll do a quick round of introductions. I've got some questions. I want to invite people to use the Q&A function or the chat to put any questions that you have. But first, let's just go around and introduce who is here and your connection to the issue, and then we'll explore some of these issues. So I'm A. Bonowitz, Executive Director of Death Penalty Action. Allie?
Hi, I'm Allie Sullivan. I'm the communications person for Death Penalty Action. I met Anthony at least a year and a half ago. Mike Zusman introduced me to him, and so I kind of introduced Anthony to Jeff. So Anthony's a friend of mine, and yeah.
David, you want to go?
Yeah, I'm David Ballard. I'm a private investigator in Oklahoma, an expert witness. I'm the private investigator that helped work the new DNA evidence, as well as look at the old evidence and generate a report and work with Death Penalty Action and Jeff Hood to try to figure out this case.
Thank you, David. Rock?
Name's Rock Grant. I am a filmmaker out in Maryland, and I had the honor of working on this film and putting it together.
Thank you, Rock. Reverend Dr. Jeff Hood.
Let's see. All right, making sure my sound is on. Reverend Dr. Jeff Hood, thankful for my good friend Abe Bonowitz and his help in creating this film. Allie, I'm thankful for her friendship and her introducing me to Anthony. David and all his hard work in terms of bringing about a cohesive investigatory narrative, and Rock, who over the last it feels like years, Rock, but has helped us put this film together and put all the pieces together. And I say all of that just to, I know we're supposed to be introducing ourselves, but I don't feel like I can introduce myself and my role as far as this film goes without speaking to all the people that are on the panel tonight. This was definitely a team effort. But with that said, I'm Anthony Sanchez's spiritual advisor, and have kind of, I guess in Anthony's case, really taken that to the next level in terms of being somewhat of an investigator, a campaign manager, and all different sorts of things. But anyways, it's an honor to be with you tonight. It's an honor to be up here with all of these beautiful people.
Thank you. So I want to ask Rock actually to start us out because so we've known Rock for a little while. He's helped us on some other videos for Death Penalty Action. And I basically just called and said, Rock, are you available? What would it take? How much do we need? And then because I knew that he is the kind of person that can do this, we filmed the interviews on May 25th, the day that we did the launch of the campaign, and we gave Rock all the information and all the Zoom videos that Jeff and David and other people have made, and all the raw stuff. And then we just sat back and were very patient while Rock Grant took, set aside time, stuff going on in your life and all the other things. And he was able to put the narrative and the story together. I mean, we didn't make any changes at all, really, except for a couple of snips here and there. And also, Rock, I just wanted to invite you to share your experience with this, and, not knowing a thing about this case until we dump it all in your lap. How do you come out on the other side?
Well, part of my process is to look at all of the footage and all of the, documents and pictures and everything that I was presented with. And it became really clear to me that, I just have questions about, Anthony Sanchez being involved in this murder. I was like, you know, it just didn't make sense to me. Everything that, starting with David and the way that he presented everything, and talking with Reverend Dr. Hood, and then talking with you, Abe, it just really became clear to me that that he didn't do it, and that really drove me, because I'm really big on social justice issues. And I always remember something that you said, I think a couple of years to me, Abe. You said, what if the government got it wrong? What if the government gets it wrong? And that's something that you really have to sit back and think about. When you talk about executing someone, you better make doggone sure that you've got it right. I mean, you shouldn't be looking to execute someone, but you better make sure that you got it right, because you can't take that back. And if you have those types of questions, then maybe you need to rethink everything. So just learning from you guys, about his story and the evidence that was presented. I mean, that really drove me, and it I was like, hey, we got to do what we got to do to help help him in this case, because I truly don't believe that he did it. So that's my little my little part of this.
Well, thank you, Rock. The just your leaning in and contributing that which you have contributed, which includes taking a really deep cut for your company and doing this work, and because you do this professionally, and we can all see you do this professionally. Thank you. And I want to come back to you, but David, there's a couple of things I want to make sure that we give you a chance to talk about and clarify for people, because one of the things that I was stuck on for a while was when you said that Melissa Keith had said, you came away with this impression that she had jumped to count on her expertise rather than exactly the science. And we thought it was in the transcript. Turns out it's in one of the depositions. But I want to invite you in particular to speak to that, and also to the fact that was in the introduction of you, that this is literally, you work for the state. The state hired you to try to prove Julius Jones was guilty. I mean, you're the state's guy, and here you are coming out in the way that you are with Anthony Sanchez. So please spell that out for us.
Of course. Well, and on the like Julius Jones part, it was I was brought in to consult on it, not so much hired, but I have testified for the state and called as a state as an expert witness, and but I have consulted on death penalty cases, and as I've said before, my expertise is violent crimes. But yes, it's when you do cases like this, you can draw some negative attention from people. They feel like that you're just out there just trying to help people get away with stuff, and that's not how it works. As I've said before, evidence only knows one thing, and that's to be evidence. And, as I've learned through the years from mentors and trainers, and that is that when you do cases, justice is always a search for the truth. That's it. It may not be the truth we want. It may not be how we hope it looks like. The justice we get is often not the justice we imagine. That being said, stepping back to the Melissa Keith, it started from, as I got parts of the discovery, there were notes from Anthony's original attorneys, and they were talking about some issues with the DNA. And it took a while before I got the transcript of Melissa Keith at trial. And one thing is at trial, even the transcript, Melissa Keith, as it is said in DNA, repeats often about how outside of a family member, there could be no other match. That's important to remember because of Anthony and his dad. The other thing was in May of 2004, I believe, 2006, sorry, there was a motion limine, or was a motion hearing. And that's where one of Anthony's original attorneys had annotated what the response was, and they were challenging the DNA. And in the notes, it states that as they were pressing on the 100% match, that it came out that, because I mean, they knew that it was nearly impossible. And I've always been trained, it's actually scientifically and physically impossible to get a 100% match from mixed DNA, just because of the fact that it's mixed. That she didn't give an exact answer of how much of a match, but that based off her experience and expertise, that it was, that she felt it was close enough. Again, kind of paraphrasing, but because I wasn't there at the hearing, but this is going off notes. And that document came in after I had the other DNA evidence, and that's a huge problem. The fact that you would base it off that, knowing that there's, you have people matching up, because I mean, one of the original stories that was done about Anthony, they talked about out of the 180 people that they tested DNA on, there were people that were a really close match, and they started looking at their family members and couldn't get there. So to base it off of, based off my training, I think it's close enough is dangerous, because it's not standalone evidence as it's being presented.
Well, thank you for that, David. You mentioned all those DNA tests that they had. I want to mention that, expand on that a little bit, because it's amazing in the small world that we're in. Reverend Bo Ireland is the Reverend and the pastor at Clark United Methodist Church, and that's a place, if you live in Oklahoma City, when all these 25 execution dates were set, that church put up 25 crosses in their front yard, right up by the sidewalk. Big crosses, 6 feet crosses. Anyway, Bo has become a center, and that space has become a center for us whenever we come to town. But we were talking, and Bo and his wife Alana both were around in Norman when this case happened. And not only that, they were thinking, oh, Anthony Sanchez is of course guilty, because that's what everybody's been told to believe. But Bo was part of the dragnet. He was one of hundreds of people that were called in and asked to give blood and saliva samples. And he's here at the Wild Goose Festival too, and actually we showed this film a little while ago here in the cinema tent, and Bo came and talked about that experience. He wasn't able to be with us through the Zoom, but we're going to have him on there. So that's I just wanted to point that out. There's so much happening here, and I can't wait for Liliana Segura to publish whatever she's writing, because nobody writes more thoroughly than she does, and I know she's looking up all these directions. But there's a question here from Randy Bauman. Thank you for this question, Randy. With clemency rejected as a path, how do you plan to free or even save Mr. Sanchez? What's the mechanism, if any? And that's, that is a really good question. What we know and what people should understand is that the courts have been shut off. I want to put it right out there that Mark Barrett and Randy Coyne, the lawyers in this case, asked the court for more money, for more investigation, and the court said no. And then when Jeff came up with this need and said, can we get an investigator? We got the money. We transferred it through the Oklahoma Coalition to abolish the death penalty, because I knew they had liquid assets, because I'd raised them a bunch of other money. So I knew they were sitting on it, and they could quickly get that money over to the attorneys, which is what they did. And Mark Barrett, if he did nothing else right in this case, and I'm sure he did plenty of things, I don't know, but he did hire David Ballard, and David Ballard has come into this and really done the analysis that asks all these questions that are open. So that's kind of where we're at. The courts have, they filed the motion for an evidentiary hearing, and that was denied. And at that point, that closes off the courts. And this is not unique to this case. We saw this, we're seeing this across the board, not just in Oklahoma, but in Texas and Missouri, and pretty much everywhere. In fact, all 13 of the federal executions that took place in the last 6 months of the Trump administration, we talked about the best lawyers in the country working on these cases, and not one of those 13 executions was delayed more than 16 hours. And most of them happened right on the time. And that is because the courts have been shut off There's something called a procedural bar. Once you get past that, you can't bring anything else. So we're stuck there. We're stuck with a governor and a clemency process that is broken, seemingly beyond repair. You have the former chairman of the board of the Oklahoma Board of Pardons and Paroles, and whatever they call it there in Oklahoma, Adam Luck, resigning because there was no room for actually, taking into consideration whether mercy was warranted. But that's why Anthony Sanchez has rejected the clemency process, because that's not where, the state always thinks that we get to put this guy on trial again and show how terrible he is, and the defense has to try to defend them again. And clemency is supposed to be about mercy. It's not supposed to be a reinvestigation of the case. And it's not supposed to be, really, it shouldn't be anything more than, is this person worthy of mercy? Because that's what clemency means. And even where there has been a recommendation for clemency, the governor has seen fit to reject it, except in the Julius Jones case. And the governor rejected it in the Julius Jones case because there was a real fear of violence if they executed Julius Jones. And nobody's talking about that, but we've got that on record too. And at the end of the day, we know now that we have to take this to the court of public opinion. And that's why death penalty action has stepped in when asked, because nobody else would be talking about this case if it weren't for Jeff Hood being his spiritual advisor and coming and saying, talk to the lawyers. The lawyers say they can't do anything. We've got to do something. And that's how we get here. So that's why you have, one donor gave us the money. She answered in 30 minutes, $10,000, which is what we had in our pocket in order to be able to hire David Ballard, and we're grateful for everybody to help make that happen. And then when we got the results and we knew that we needed to do something, I went back to that donor and she said yes again and provided the funds to create this. But we need now is the opportunity to just take this out to the court of public opinion as much as possible. So that means, Randy, that everybody in the movement gets to get on board and start asking the same questions that we're asking. Everybody in the movement gets to start pushing this film out there and letting people see what David Ballard has seen. Everybody in the movement gets to say, are we going to allow this to happen? Are we going to help make it happen by getting in the way of Anthony Sanchez and trying to prove his innocence? Or are we going to be a team player and try to help stop this guy's execution? So that's what we need, is everybody in the movement getting involved. And if we can find the right level of finance, I'll be putting up billboards in Oklahoma. We'll be doing marches. We'll be doing all kinds of stuff. Just watch, it's coming. August. If the powers that be haven't stepped in, then in August it's going to get hairy in Oklahoma. But I actually feel like we've got a pretty good in with some of the powers that be, and we're not going to be talking about that because there are people actively trying to undermine this campaign. So just know we're going to the highest levels, and we think we've got some ins there. So, Jeff, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's important to point out that. Well, first of all, I apologize that I've been moving my camera so much. We're in the middle of our hotel room. My kids are next door, screaming and whatnot. And as many of you know, our home was destroyed a couple of months ago. So we've been in a hotel for 3 months. But nevertheless, again, I apologize for all the weird camera angles. Abe, I just wanted to point out that one of the failures that I see in Oklahoma in terms of engaging various cases is a simple failure of imagination to see if there are other pathways and other means by which these executions can be stopped. One of the things that Anthony told me from the very beginning, I remember first or second conversation, that he was not interested in clemency because he had seen repeatedly, people being monsterized, all of the, awful pictures flung up there again. And he said, I remember very vividly him telling me that clemency is not where an innocent man goes to prove their innocence. He said, that's not what this process is made for. He said, clemency is where an innocent man should go to receive mercy in terms of stopping the execution, should go to receive justice. And he said that he just simply did not believe that the clemency process as it is was a place for him to receive any sort of justice. Again, he said repeatedly, I want justice, not mercy. I want people to know that I'm innocent. And he has proceeded through the process with tremendous courage, tremendous integrity. He is not there, willing to, grovel and cry and get on his knees to beg for his life. He's just not willing to do that because he believes that he is innocent. And again, he is interested in justice and not mercy. And I'm thankful, I put this in the chat, but I'm thankful that there are state officials who are engaging this campaign at the highest levels of government, who have an interest in bringing about what is justice in this case. First of all, I could go on and on, but first of all, we're very interested in getting a stay. Obviously, obviously we're most interested in keeping him alive, but even beyond that, we have been denied a process for proving his innocence. That's the bottom line. We've been denied a process for proving his innocence. And so we are, of course, with Anthony's blessing, making our own way. And so I would be very thankful for all prayers, well wishes, everything that everybody's got, because we're having to put a lot of trust in people whose political ideologies are very different than ours. But at the same time, who also have an inkling in the same way that we do that Anthony Sanchez is an innocent man.
Thank you, Jeff. Randy, if you've got ideas, Randy Bauman is in the audience here. He's the former head of the Capitol Habeas Unit. If I've got that mistaken, please correct me. But we'd love to have more ideas. I do want to say that, again, how messed up our system is right now. The U.S. Supreme Court has said it's constitutional to execute a person who may be innocent. That's the Herrera case. But more recently, they have shut off the doors to people getting relief from the federal courts. Last year in the Shin versus Ramirez case, they basically said that defendants at the state level seeking to get redress and relief from ineffective assistance of counsel at the state level no longer have access to the federal courts. And the interesting thing about that is that in arguing against that case, the state of Arizona's lawyer actually said that Barry Jones, the guy who's bringing that case, was, the evidence of his innocence is irrelevant to the conversation we're having in this case. And of course, the Supreme Court denied him, and he was very, very fortunate that the politics, the election changed who was in the governor's office and changed who was in the attorney general's office in Arizona. And that allowed the space for a conversation to happen. And I think it's about a month now, Barry Jones walked off a death row and is free. They forced him to take an a plea to a lesser offense. But the bottom line is that it took going around, finding another way to make it happen. And that's what we've got to do here. And again, just a few weeks ago, in another case, the U.S. Supreme Court said federal prisoners wanting to raise their claims of innocence could not do so in certain cases. And again, I'm not an attorney. I'm not the right person to explain all that. But what I can say with certainty is that the system as it presently exists is broken and has made it very, very difficult to raise questions of not only of innocence, but also of other malfeasance, of racism in your case, et cetera, mental illness, mental capacity, all those things. So, Randy, we're open to ideas, but we're going to do what we can with what we've got. And what we can do with what we've got is bring it to people whose voices are louder than ours and who may have some capacity within their positions in the state legislature or in the attorney general's office to do something to intervene. And we know just from watching the gossip case, as ridiculous as it is, when the attorney general shows up and on the side of the defendant and they still can't find space for relief, that's another reason why the clemency process in Oklahoma is damaged beyond repair in this stage. And there certainly is some time to deal with that in the Anthony Sanchez case. So we're going to do everything we can. We've got 9 weeks and we're looking for the resources to do our best. We're looking for ideas. We're looking for volunteers who want to step up, help make it happen. In the meantime, by the way, there's another execution, Jermaine Cannon, this coming Thursday. We got to be out there protesting that, but then it's going to be Anthony Sanchez all the way. So other questions?
Hey,
I had something.
I had 2 things I wanted to add. One is that for Anthony, the moment that kind of changed, I guess, took him from that it was a firmly held conviction that he wasn't going to do clemency to I would rather die than do clemency was, I think the Richard Glossop moment, where the entire state seems to, maybe perhaps not the entire state, but a great many powerful figures comes to the aid of Richard Glossop, and yet he is still unable to receive clemency. There is no doubt that the board is stacked against anyone who comes from death row and goes into that process. And I think another thing that is important to point out is that Anthony, I think that he believes that he has been, for decades now, monsterized, and ultimately hasn't been able to speak his side of the story, his side of the case. And he feels like every time that's done in the clemency process, that it's quickly washed away and forgotten. And I know that Anthony wanted something bigger that wouldn't be forgotten. So we try to give him that. The other thing is Cassie Bordeaux in the chat. Cassie, I'm really thankful for all of your help thus far on Anthony's behalf. You asked, would it be a good idea to contact state legislators and government officials? And my response to this is absolutely. And even beyond that, your granny, your grandpa, your aunt, your uncle, your cousins, whoever lives down in Oklahoma, certainly contact everybody. But yes, of course, state officials, they have a voice. And this is one of the things that Connie Johnson, former Senator Connie Johnson has said, is that, when you contact the legislature, hopefully you are contacting the people that the legislature represents. So I think that it is very wise to, continue calling and engaging whoever we can, but particularly the legislature and other state officials. And the bottom line is, I think it's important to tell them very frankly, we believe that Anthony Sanchez is innocent. I mean, this is not a too much doubt campaign. This is a campaign where we believe 100% that Anthony Sanchez is innocent. And in fact, not just innocent, but not involved, not engaged, not around, nothing. And this is a particularly different kind of ask. This is us saying, hey, don't just look at the evidence and say, well, it might be a question or two, but, we'll just still throw him away. We're asking you to listen to the words of David Ballard. We're asking you to watch the film. We're asking you to engage the evidence critically. And we're asking you to come to the same conclusion that we have. And if you can come to that, if you can do all of that and still believe that this man needs to be executed, in my mind, you don't have a soul. But I'll leave that for the theologians. So thank you.
Let me share the screen here. Now, this is the free Anthony Sanchez campaign webpage. It's just freeanthonysanchez.org, and very basic, very clear. There's little videos. Each of these things addresses some of the major issues in the case with a little video, like the ones in the film that Jeff made with various people. You can read the narrative of that. These have links to the, that which we have. Unfortunately, apparently, I'm told Mark Barrett is sitting on 40 boxes of evidence that he won't let this investigator look at. We should be asking Mark why Anthony's team isn't allowed to look at the evidence that he is sitting on. This is the defense attorney, and he won't let the investigator look at the evidence. Why is that? There's a number of resources here. In particular, if you click on the news reports or press releases, you can see the press that's been gathered on this case since we began the campaign. But I want to point out in particular the petition. And you're going to be seeing some resources coming out here. So the petition, we've updated a bit to just make sure that the ask is very clear and in line with what David Ballard had articulated in the film. This is a petition that is going to be delivered regularly to the Attorney General and to the Governor. Test Glenn Sanchez's DNA and put it in the CODIS database and see if he gets a match on some other cold cases. Apparently, we're not the only ones that think that Glenn Sanchez was up to no good for a long time and hurt some people. The fingerprints, there's 41 fingerprints that don't match Anthony Sanchez. Who do they match? Can we test them against Glenn Sanchez? Do we have his fingerprints? The shoe print. There's so much more. So there's all this is spelled out in the petition. So we're looking for people to sign the petition. By the way, Ali put a link to the petition in the chat here for Jermaine Cannon. I put a link for the webpage and for Anthony's petition in there. We're looking to make this go big to the extent possible. If we get if the movement will get involved, if the partner organizations in Oklahoma will get involved. The real question I have is why are we not all in? And we could be asking those partners, why are you not all in? On this, just like you were with Richard Glossip. That's why the back of our t-shirt, the first t-shirt we made, said we want the Glossip treatment. And that is not a reflection on Richard Glossip, it's a reflection on Kim Kardashian and Dr. Phil and big time out-of-state lawyers and legislators and everybody saying, hold on, there's a question about this guy's guilt. We should all be all in. And that's what we're looking for. I think the only real difference here, sad to say, is that Anthony Sanchez is a brown man. Richard Glossip is a white man. Native Americans don't mean squat to the powers that be in Oklahoma. That's what it looks like, and that's how it feels when they won't even look. But I got to say this also: we've been trying to reach out to the Choctaw Nation. I started in January, reaching out to the Choctaw Nation. Finally, a few weeks ago, we got their attention, and we were able to have a conversation with somebody in leadership at the Choctaw Nation. And basically what he told me is, we don't know if this guy's guilty or innocent. We haven't really looked at it, but we can't take this case on because then we have to take them all on. And I said to him, well, you should be taking them all on, but what is it about a case like this? And, so that was but what he did say also, and in fairness, explaining, they get a lot of people in prison and they got a lot of people that need their help and they just have to, they've been burned. What he also said is, we're on record as the Choctaw Nation opposing executions. There's no doubt about that. We oppose all executions. We oppose the fact that executions take place on our land. That's right. Choctaw Nation land is where the prison is, where the death chamber is. So, we're working on that. But we're also reaching out to other Native American activist leaders to encourage them to also get involved in this case. We didn't put a big focus on his Native American heritage in the film. We had to keep it really tight, but that's going to be something that we're talking about too. Questions, other questions? Anybody been watching the chat? There's questions for us.
Hey, while we're waiting on those questions, I wanted to jump in and say that I know that that Richard Glossop is another person who has unquestionably been through hell in Oklahoma, and a lot of that had to do with his earlier legal representation. And I think that Richard Glossop has set out the people around him has certainly set out a path for a lot of us to follow in terms of how we engage. Communities in Oklahoma, how we engage politicians in Oklahoma. So I'm very thankful for the Glossop campaign for that. I wanted to also point out that it hasn't been too long ago that, I was sitting in the visiting area with a number of guys, and, the conversation turned to legal representation in Oklahoma. And there were probably 6, 7 guys in the room, and 6, 7 guys on death row. And the same names came up over and over again of attorneys who simply would not do anything in their cases. Guys who hadn't talked to their attorneys in years, various people whose attorneys, they wanted to present claims of innocence, and their attorneys had told them point blank that they didn't believe them and they weren't going to be doing that. I know that there is a deep feeling amongst a variety of folks who are on death row that not only do they have poor legal representation, but that they have some of the worst lawyers that Oklahoma has to offer. With that said, I'm sure that that's not the case with everybody. I know I've interacted with some folks who, have appreciated their attorneys and feel like their attorneys have stepped up and done what they needed them to do. But the point remains that in Anthony Sanchez's case, it's not that, a lot of people will say, well, why is this just coming up now? And it's a fair question. Why are all these claims just coming up now? The bottom line is that Anthony has been trying to pursue these claims for decades, not just a couple of months, not just a couple of years, but for decades. And he has consistently had attorneys who have stood in his way. You heard from Anthony's mother at the trial that, she is sitting here going, why aren't you trying to prove his innocent? Why aren't you trying to, give evidence that could exonerate him? And the reply was, I'm just trying to keep him off of death row. And, I'm just beyond disturbed, to be honest, about what I have seen in this case and multiple others, of attorneys that are so willing to dispose of these guys, just dispose of them, then have to do the work to prove innocence in a lot of these cases. I'll say this, and then I'll kick it back to you, Abe. I think too that, for Anthony, that was another one of the first things that he told me. His current attorneys, he has long felt like have screwed him over, to the point where he has even asked, and I don't think this is true, but he's even asked the question, did I think that they were involved in some sort of conspiracy to get him executed? And, I don't think that that's the truth, but I think that it does speak to the fact that, can you imagine any deeper of a broken relationship between a client and their attorneys that a client would believe that they're part of a conspiracy to get them executed. You know,
I can't. I'm sorry, Jeff. I didn't mean to cut you off. Keep going. I'll switch that back.
I was just, I'll say this, Abe. It just is. This has just been an inconceivable experience for me, having this engagement with Anthony in Oklahoma, because it has just shown me how far attorneys are willing to go for paychecks, to prove that they are not incompetent or they did everything they were supposed to do, to go in a direction of showing that they still have some level of expertise, and it's this dirtbag client of theirs who should be taking all the blame. They shouldn't be taking any of the blame. At the end of the day, the words of Anthony Sanchez echo in my ears anytime we this subject comes up. And he has said repeatedly, I would rather die than have the attorneys who are representing me right now continue to represent me.
Pardon my thunder in the background there. David wanted to add something here.
Yeah, sorry, I was having some issues with my phone. One of the things is I forgot when I announced who I was. Besides myself, I work with other people within my team of like experts. For instance, Matt Davis is one of our death investigators. I worked with Matt for years, have taught classes with him, proof for law enforcement on crime scenes, equivocal death. Another is Tara Cardinal. She was a big help in putting together the spreadsheets we did on DNA. She and helped reach out to some other experts. And one of the things I want to state is that we've not only put this together, but we have spoken with other scientists and experts, geneticists, and either they came back to the same questions we had or just flat out agreed that this was not possible, what we're seeing on these DNA charts. And we had a question before, and as Abe said, a lot of it's in these other videos we've done. We go more in depth, but to give kind of a general answer, because DNA can be confusing. Matter of fact, in 2007, there was a paper written by the Department of Justice along with the FBI crime lab, and where they discussed how complicated DNA was, that people didn't really understand it. And in fact, in that paper, which is around the same time, they said you could take 10 analysts, put them in a room with the same evidence and get 10 different results. Now, this isn't attacking analysts or other people. One of the things that we've talked about before is you got to keep in mind how new DNA was to use in criminal cases. And so the understanding of it as far as any side, so when you bring it up, it's very hard to challenge because juries hear DNA and our mindset goes to TV shows, and how perfect it is. And so that's something to keep in mind. What we're saying in this deal is Juli Buskin had a single source sample, meaning it came directly from her, which was her blood taken from the ME. In her 13 locus, which you have 2 alleles in each one, she had 3 columns that didn't just have partial, complete matches to Anthony Sanchez. That should never happen unless you're a relative. Not only did it match Anthony, it matched Glenn. It also matched another subject they had looked at. So when you don't have all the data that went into that, the question becomes, how is that possible? Because that should never happen. Well,
David,
that's where, yeah, sorry.
You're talking about, this is a direct DNA examination of her direct blood, compared to what came up on the swabs.
Yes. So Anthony had swabs that were taken from him, and that's where they say that they got his profile. Those columns match the same on 2 independent sources, single source. If it was matching on evidence alone, that could be the fact that it's mixed DNA, which still gets us back to the same issue. But to have single source candidates having matching DNA is scientifically impossible unless they're relatives. 30% makes you cousin or niece or nephew. And we know that Juli Buskin and Anthony and Glenn and this other subject were not matches, or not relatives, sorry. So, and then when you get down and look at that same sheet that is in the documentary, that's that spreadsheet that is done by Melissa Keith, you start looking at the evidence columns of the items that were swabbed and tested, and it's all broken up, and it's, they can't get anything. I mean, they can't get a full enough to even determine who it belonged to. And then all of a sudden there's this one match column that matches directly to Anthony, but also is a 30% match to Juli. So you can kind of see what we're saying. It's tripping over itself. And why is one column so perfect, but the others are all over the place? And there's never been an explanation for what they did to how they came to that outside of that May 15th, 2006 letter from Anthony's legal team where they're going over the hearings and what happened. And when they pressed, for instance, one of the things that Melissa Keith testified is that she conducted a presumptive seminal fluid test from an anal swab. As it's been stated, we all noticed early on that the medical examiner found no seminal fluid during their examination. And then a swab, they said they got a presumptive positive. At trial, it was said, or at the hearing, it was said it was inconclusive. When it was pressed on, it wasn't inconclusive. They returned no results. You can get false presumptive positives for things. There's a number of things I've done. I teach that class, and I've swabbed many items for seminal fluid, and you can get a false positive for a number of reasons, and you still don't have a profile either. So anyway, with that being said, when she was pressed, that's where we keep getting in the news. You've heard that there's been statements by even a judge saying, well, they found seminal fluid in her rectal swab. That's not true. And that's a big factor because the strongest samples being on an item that was found way away from the car, while the underwear that she was wearing at the time do not contain those same profiles. How is that possible? She wasn't wearing the leotard at the time. And I think the concept was, again, this is where we get into some of the things where it's becoming like conjecture or what we call trolling a case. You're taking bits and pieces here and there and trying to make it connect, just like the shoe and the footprint. And, was Anthony even there? How do they know that Anthony was even around the apartment complex? So with that being said, the strongest items should have been right there, direct contact, and they're not. So there's more questions than answers, but in the hearing, they were blocked back then from bringing some of this stuff, which happens when you have motion hearings. And none of the other that I know of, I haven't seen for sure, but from what I've heard, none of the other analysts who looked at this evidence were called. One person testified, which is typically hearsay. And I'm not an attorney, but I've worked in this field a long time, just quoting how we have to train and understand. One person called for all this DNA for years who never touched it until 2004. So if that helps understand, is that the DNA is not only unsupportive of that Anthony is 100% match, but it's so all over the place you almost can't tell. But if the swabs were protected and sealed as they're supposed to be, typically 50 to 80 years, they should be retested to see if those profiles are there. And like we said before, if Glenn's fingerprints show up on that car out of all those prints, Anthony's were checked. His prints are nowhere on that car. And if you do that, and if Glenn's fingerprints show up on that car, there's no reason why those fingerprints should be there. So I think there were several questions. I was trying to answer those as well with kind of explain a little easier of what we're looking at. And that, as I told Jeff and I've told Abe, the more I looked at this, the evidence in this case is not strong at all. It could be if it was being looked at, but it's being made to look at Anthony rather than let the evidence just be evidence and point you in the right direction. Keep in mind, again, 180 male individuals were tested against and were said they've been very close matches, but not enough of a match. So why is Anthony a close match, but he got it hung on him?
It's crazy.
Hey, let me jump in really quick. I was just to add to what David said. It's important for people to know Glenn Sanchez doesn't have to be the killer in order for Anthony Sanchez to be innocent. I think it's important that people understand that we are offering Glenn as a possibility. I've put it like this before. I believe 100% that Anthony Sanchez is innocent. I am about at an 88-90% that Glenn Sanchez is the actual killer. Some people are higher, some people are lower with regards to Glenn, but the point is that the evidence is not there to prove that Anthony Sanchez did this. And in addition to that, this whole campaign has been about granting Anthony Sanchez, standing with him in his agency and giving him the power and the voice to make a lot of these decisions for himself. And so I think it's important for me to also point out that Anthony doesn't want to believe that this was his father. I mean, they stayed close for a number of years until his death. And so I think it's important to know that, this is complicated. But the problem is that it seems like we're the only ones saying this is complicated. That for decades, the state, the prosecutors, even some of Anthony's own attorneys have said, well, this isn't that complicated. He's guilty. But I think it's important for us to take a step back and say, yes, if Glenn's fingerprints are on that car, then yes, my 88-90% goes to 100%. But it's also important to state that Anthony Sanchez is innocent, regardless of Glenn Sanchez. Now, I'll also add, and then I'll kick it back to you, it's important to also point out that, the horror that Anthony grew up with, the horror that Charlotte experienced, in my mind creates a certain level of culpability and that in my mind is hard to shake. But, Anthony Sanchez is still a human being who is struggling with his dad. He's just finding out this stuff about Charlotte, the way his dad treated Charlotte. So in spite of all that we're talking about tonight, the evidence, whatever, Anthony Sanchez is still a man who is in deep need of your prayers. I mean, this has been incredibly tough on him. And for anyone to say that this is something that Anthony threw out there in order to distract people or to try to save his life, this has been horrific for him. All of it, from his lawyers to the deal with his dad. But at the same time, he is determined to prove that he is innocent. And this is one of the reasons why I think that Anthony Sanchez is one of the most courageous men that I've ever met, because he is willing to go to such great lengths to prove his innocence. And I wish that his attorneys had been willing to go even a quarter of the way to prove his innocence, because if they had, we wouldn't be in this situation.
Well, and that's the thing that's going to be, people are going to start asking them, why are these guys bringing this stuff up and not you? Where are you on this? And unfortunately, and I've spoken now with somebody who was there. So Anthony has asked the judge to allow him to replace his attorneys with attorneys who will actually work on his behalf. Because his attorneys have said straight up, we're done. We're going to do the clemency hearing. We're done. And we're not going to pursue your innocence. And and that's the stunning thing, is that at this hearing where the judge was asked to allow Anthony to replace those attorneys with attorneys who would actually do the work and advocate for him and his innocence, and the judge disallowed that. And in that hearing, you had people from the Oklahoma legal community. I'm not going to name them here, but they knew who they are. And Mark Barrett was there. And what they did instead was they tore down and implicated and made Jeff Hood out to be an evil monster who was just in this for some other nefarious reasons. And you can read that in the judge's order. about how terrible Jeff Hood and what agenda he has, and the bullshit here. The bullshit is that you have active people who proclaim themselves as death penalty abolitionists in Oklahoma seeking to undermine this individual's ability to defend himself, including holding on to his money, which is outrageous and should be returned immediately. But that's a whole other story. We have another person on the panel here. I want to bring up Tara Cardinal. She can introduce herself a little bit more, and she's got something that she's part of the investigation team. Tara?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, can you turn your camera on?
I don't know, can I?
I thought it was on.
All right, hold on. Let me.
There you go.
Here I am. Hi, everybody. First of all, I just want to say that it was actually Jeff Hood that convinced me that Anthony was innocent. We had a conference call back in February, and Jeff had asked us to take a moment to pray for Anthony because he was so distraught and felt so betrayed that his father would commit this crime and leave him on death row to die for this thing. And I immediately thought to myself, that's not the reaction of a guilty man. A guilty man would be relieved. He would know that there was somebody else to pin his crime on. But that wasn't Anthony's response. So I just want to share just a couple of things I've picked up in my research. So there's this article from March 2012, that long ago, and it's called "Forensic Firm Investigated Over DNA Blunder in Rape Case." And you'll find that there are a lot of similarities between this one in the UK and the situation with Anthony, except that this victim was not murdered. So just to get to the meat of it, this week, the rape case against Adam Scott was dropped by prosecutors. Police sources say he was not a suspect until samples from the crime scene were sent to the lab. The forensics company told detectives that DNA was extracted from the samples was a strong match to the DNA of Scott, who was then charged. The examination by the lab produced a 1 in a billion chance that Scott was not tied to the crime scene, and the result was false. Scott, 20, who was in prison for an unrelated affair, was arrested for the offense of the rape on the 20th of October. Sources say they believe the contamination occurred when a sample taken from the scene of the rape was being tested for any sign of DNA from the perpetrator. The vial containing samples from the scene was in a container containing 7 or 8 other vials of evidence in other cases, and contamination occurred. Now, this goes on and on. Those are the important parts. That's just one of the articles that I found. Let me see if I can cut like this.
I want to thank you, Tara. I mean, there's so much more, but just that said plenty. I realize here we're already an hour and a half into this almost. I know that Rock has to go. We can hang on a few more minutes, but Rock, I did want to make sure that we brought you back up and give you a moment to say a farewell and thank you for everything that you've done on this. And we've got more coming, everybody. We're going to have some short social media worthy videos as soon as we can get to them. We've got 9 weeks. And again, we're just doing the best we can with what we've got and doing the stuff that we're not used to doing. We've never done this before, but nobody else is doing it. So we have to step up. Rock, we're grateful for you being part of the team. If you want to say anything before we go, before you need to go.
Just wanted to say, I thank you for allowing me to help in this effort. It's I just always remember what the good Reverend Doctor said. We want the truth. And we've got to search for the truth, not just for Anthony, but also for Juli Buskin and her family.
That's right.
Amen.
Yeah. Because I putting this together, I just felt so horrible, that this happened to to her loved ones. I felt bad for Anthony, and I'm like, this is just bad all around. But I think, we can't forget about, the victims' loved ones and everything, because I know they're hurting and things like that. But like the good Reverend Doctor says, we got to find the truth. We just want the truth. And, it just seems like, what is it going to hurt just to examine the evidence? But the technology that you have right now, with all the questions that have been raised, look at the evidence one more time, just to make sure you've got it right, because execution is final. You can't bring that back. You just can't. And if you get it wrong, you've got to live with that for the rest of your life. And I just hope that we are, I'm not going to say I hope, I believe we're going to be successful in this. And I'm not just saying that just to say it. I truly believe we're going to be successful, because I think we've got enough here to raise some questions, and we've just got to keep at it. So thank you for allowing me to help in this effort. I'm with you. I'll be praying. I'll be editing, and I just wish everyone well. And let's do this for Anthony and for Juli. You guys have a good night.
Thank you, Rod. Thank you.
Bye.
I was going to quick before we close out. I think a lot of the naysayers are going to say, hey, there's, the case is done. He's not doing clemency. It's over. I want everybody to realize, to remember, to stay focused on the fact that we have the power. We have the power of the people to push state officials in Oklahoma who have the authority to go back and look at this evidence, who have the authority to ask for Anthony's date to be removed. This is not over by any stretch of the imagination. I would argue that we have just begun. And so in the next few weeks and the next couple months, I intend to give everything that I have to save the life of Anthony Sanchez. And I think it's important what Rock said. We need to let these state officials know that it is on them. It is incumbent on them to keep an innocent man from being executed. And I think that we need to keep saying that over and over and over again until these state officials move. And I believe that they will.
Thank you for that, Jeff. You said something to me the other day. Keep it on the grid here, Ali, because we're going to wind it down. But one of the things that Jeff said to me the other day is, the fires of hell are not hot enough for the people that are abolitionists who are getting in the way of this. So we're going to invite all those people on board and start doing what they should be doing, which is advocating for the next guy in line to be executed. And in particular, this one, don't take our word for it, but we're not going to take it sitting down. Ali and David and Tara, I want to give you a moment to add a final thought, and then I'm going to just show the webpage. One more will be done for tonight, but we are just getting started. There's so much work to do, especially you folks on the ground there. I see you, Ebony. I see so many of you there. We've got to deliver these petitions and make some noise on Wednesday for Jermaine Cannon to be outside the prison and the Capitol, on the governor's mansion on Thursday. We're going to kill Jermaine Cannon. And then the focus has to be, what can we do to wake up the powers that be and have the power to stop this execution and free this innocent man? Ali?
I want to throw in there, before Ali, I want to give a shout out to Ebony. Ebony is one of the hardest working abolitionists in all of Oklahoma. And she is a seeker of truth. She's always in the streets. She is everything that we have. And I just wanted to give a quick shout out and tell her how thankful I am for folks like her in Oklahoma.
Amen. Allie?
Ooh, I'm just grateful for everyone that came together for Anthony. When I first met Anthony, I was in the heights of dealing with my friend Coastal Chantakuman, who's right there, who was executed last August. So I didn't have the capability. I just didn't have the energy to do all this stuff for Anthony. So I'm so grateful that Jeff took it on and kind of went in with it full throttle. And I also want to shout out Ebony. Ebony is wonderful. She always shows up. She is always there. So I'll send it back to you, Abe.
Tara and then David.
Not much to add, just looking forward to going through those 40 boxes of discovery to seeing if we can put together an airtight case that proves his innocence. I think there might be a couple of documents in there that might do that.
Yeah, well, I guess that's the question is what do we do? What do we do? What do we do to get the defense attorney to allow the investigator to look at the evidence? I mean, how crazy is this, right? I mean, we don't usually get into this, and we're not trying to badmouth attorneys, except for when they're getting in the way of proving the innocence of their own client. I mean, come on. David?
Sorry, for some reason my app keeps delaying with the mic. Definitely agree with Tara on the fact of looking at the evidence, just so we can have an even bigger picture. For people that don't know who I am, I don't know who all's attending. One of the things is that talking with Jeff and everyone, it's not just what I do. I don't just work on defense cases. I've also worked on cases that prosecute, especially human traffickers and child abusers and domestic violence. We have a foundation. We work on both sides. So, it's one of the things that's been said is that, investigators sometimes are brought in just to do that. Well, as we all said in the beginning when we first met, I don't ever take a case forward that I don't 100% believe in. And I believe in this case, and I believe in Anthony Sanchez. And leave everybody with this thought. I remember reminded of a quote that a professor had said once a long time ago, and I can't remember what book it's from, but it says, "Let the condemned crawl over us with us clung to their feet." And I think that's one of the most important things to remember when we're looking at this, because it calls on the question the manner in which they were condemned. So, but thank you for allowing me to be part of this, and I look forward to continuing the fight. Jeff knows about some other innocent man cases I've worked on. One lasted 7 years. I've worked on one that lasted 12 years, and I'm not known for letting go or giving up very easily, as I can tell all of you are built that same way. But thank you to everyone.
Hey, Abe, before you close it out, I did have a word from Anthony that he wanted to share.
Please.
Just a quick word. He basically said, I'm an innocent man, and I don't intend to act like a guilty one. And he wanted to thank everyone for bolstering him and strengthening him to do that.
And you were with Anthony just yesterday on death row and other guys too.
Yeah, I talked to him. Yeah, and I talked to him earlier today. Yeah, we we talk at least once a day, sometimes multiple times a day. He's become such a dear friend, and I'm very thankful for him. And again, I can't say it enough. Anthony Sanchez. I mean, I've been around the world, done a lot of study, worked with a lot of different kinds of people. Anthony Sanchez is one of the most courageous people I've ever met, no doubt.
All right, well, we're all in it, all in. I'm going to share, this is the webpage, it's Death Penalty Action. Just start right at the top. I want to make sure everybody knows on Thursday in Congress, Representative Ayanna Pressley and Senator Dick Durbin introduced the Federal Death Penalty Prohibition Act. And there's an action right here at the top of the front page to, if you live in the United States, to write to your members of Congress. And if you live outside the United States, and we've got a number of people in our audience tonight from outside the United States, it's another opportunity to contact both the U.S. ambassador to your country and also your own, whatever your State Department is, and ask them to advocate in support of this legislation to the extent that they can. Scroll down just a little bit, and you got the video. It's right there. You got the link to the Anthony Sanchez page right there. Scroll down a little bit. You got the executions that are coming up this week in Alabama. We're going to be watching this. So I want to tell you, well, first it's going to be, we're going to be getting out the links for the virtual vigil soon, but Jermaine Cannon's scheduled to be executed on Thursday. So what we do in Oklahoma is we do a petition delivery at 4 p.m. on the day before the execution at the governor's office in the Capitol. So that's set. Connie Johnson's going to be leading. Bo Ireland's going to be in leading. Ebony's going to be in leadership there. We're going to be delivering the petitions for Jermaine Cannon at 4 o'clock, and then following that, if it's something people can, there'll be a visibility action outside the governor's mansion. Then at 9 a.m. outside the prison in McAllister, and also outside the governor's mansion in Oklahoma City, there'll be protests there, and we'll be bringing it all to you through the live Zoom. And then, unfortunately, later in the day, starting at 5 p.m. Central Time, in Alabama. Now, Alabama, all eyes on Alabama, because a year ago, they took 3 hours to kill Joe James Jr. After butchering him, trying to get a vein going. And then the next two executions in September, and then in October, they poked and they prodded and they sliced and they diced and they tortured these prisoners on the gurney, and then couldn't finish by midnight. So what did they do? They sent them back. Both those prisoners, the guys that were on the execution gurney, getting poked, getting sliced, are still alive, and they're on death row in Alabama. And there's going to be another attempt to see if they get it right. And the only thing that Alabama has done is extend the window of time that they have to get it done. So we're going to be watching these this week, and then it's going to be time to move on. There's also execution scheduled. If you click on this, you'll see the other scheduled. We got one in Missouri and one in Florida in the beginning of August. Other projects are here, and so much is happening, and we just need people getting involved. Getting involved, and that's why we're just grateful for each and every one of you. And if there ever was a time to be figuring out who you know and what is their capacity, because I'm going to tell you, if I had 10 or 15 or $100,000, people in Oklahoma City would not be able to go anywhere without knowing about this case. And somebody out there knows and has that kind of capacity. If you give them, help us do this. And for those of you in Oklahoma City, call the leadership and the other organizations, and ask them, how come you're not out there pushing this case? How come I'm not seeing emails about this petition? How come you're not calling on people to call the governor and call the attorney general and ask them to put Glenn Sanchez into CODIS and test those fingerprints? How come you abolitionists aren't actually actively engaging in this case? I'd like to know the answer to that. Where's the Innocence Project? How come Jason Flom started talking about it and then backed out? What is it that spooked him? We'd like to know. So there you have it. Coming at you from a rainstorm in North Carolina. I'm Ed Bonowitz, and together with the team here, thank you all. You're going to be hearing more, and we need everybody. Jump on board, keep it happening. If you've got any extra cash or know somebody that can help with this, that's what we need. Is the money is what makes it move. Yeah. Mandy is asking about the money surrounding all the child welfare system, et cetera, et cetera. Look, it's all about money. It's all about, Mark Barrett and Randy Coyne just want their paycheck, which they get after the clemency hearing, which they might not get if the clemency doesn't happen. I don't know. We're not trying to cut off their money. Everybody deserves to be paid for work done, but damn it, do the work. Make it a great night, everybody.